this day right here. Okay, now we're recording. All right, so I have the amazing Laura Hum and Sully. Give me your pen name again.
Oh, Tory Element.
Tory Element. Thank you. I didn't want to give away your super secret identity.
No worries.
Yeah, and Tory Element, who we're going to call Sully through the rest of the recording, just to warn everybody. We've been talking about doing these character wheels that like help build character voice. And we thought it would be fun if we just got on and did one together. And we're going to do it for a movie hopefully people know. If you don't know, just go to YouTube and search Lethal Weapon movie clips. And so many movie clips come up. A nonsensical amount of movie clips come up. So
now wait. That's 4.
It doesn't matter.
They're all the same. They are not all the same. This one has Rene Russo, and Riggs is way less crazy.
That's true. So I guess we need to determine which one we're doing.
We have to do the original.
But Leo Getz isn't in the original. He doesn't show up till 2.
Yeah. It's actually better without him.
What? No way. Okay. All right. Look, my podcast. I do what I want. We're gonna. So okay. We'll start with Murtaugh and Riggs, and if we don't go for like 3 hours, we'll then do Leo, and we'll do Murtaugh and Riggs from Lethal Weapon 1. Fair?
Thank you.
Okay.
I think I've only seen 4 twice. I don't know that I could do enough.
Yeah, well, I put another character in here from 4. So if
I saw that, yeah.
The best.
I mean, I could probably remember enough to get it.
Well, let's try to get through 1 and 2. Let's try to get through Roger and Riggs, Murtaugh and Riggs. You think I'd remember my name? I named my 5th kid after this character. So I tried for Sully. You don't know this, but I tried for Laura knows this, but I tried for years to slip the name Riggs into one of my kids.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. And with the first kid, my wife was like, "No freaking way are we using the name Riggs." So that kid is Jackson. And then the second kid was a girl, and Riggs is inappropriate. And then the third kid, I was pushing for Riggs, and we agreed. We were watching an X-Men movie, and we agreed on Logan for Wolverine.
That's a good one.
So I felt like that was a win. And then she was really hard on Jude. She really loved the name Jude, so we went with Jude, which has worked out because every year at his birthday we make a big family video where we all sing "Hey Jude." And then the 5th kid, I had completely worn her down, and she had no willpower left. So I was like,
you also had 4 others in your corner.
I did, even though none of my children have ever seen these movies. But they were all I finally got Riggs through. Okay. See, I can't stop doing the Leo Getz thing now that I've done it. Okay. All right. Sorry. So, Laura, do we want to do general details, or we just want to skip to the hard part of the wheel?
So, I don't think we need to do it, but I definitely think that we need to talk about why there are 3 columns here, because I think it's really, really easy to conflate these 3.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about general character details, we're talking about like backstory and plot lines and like just general characteristics. Yeah, like father, 2 kids. Martin Riggs is a widower. He has military experience. Like these are the things that you need to know about who your character is fundamentally. Doesn't really have anything to do with their voice, because you can create a father of 2 who wants to retire and is an old cop that has any kind of voice you want him to have. So they're kind of separate, but it's important to think about them all individually. And then when you get into the place where you're talking about, sorry, I'm just getting into a place where I'm like
Go.
teaching mode, so
You're doing
shut
great.
me down whenever you're
No, you're doing great. Go.
whenever you're tired of listening to my voice. Just tell me.
Whatever.
When-
Look, Laura, I've been listening to you for 16 years now. So
Yeah.
if I haven't got tired yet, it's
I
not
was
going
gonna
to happen.
say, and why do you keep asking me to come on the show?
Yeah, it's great. I don't have to do anything. I can just hit record and then sit back and do nothing. All right, keep going.
So then when we talk about personality, we're talking about emotional elements typically. I like to think of personality as like adjectives, whereas character details are nouns. So widower is a noun. Military experience is a noun. Not technically a noun, but
Yeah, and
whatever.
I just put in our chart for Riggs experiencing suicidal ideations, which, by the way, these movies, this first movie, does not handle well. This does not age well in the movie.
True.
Yeah.
We know a lot more now than we did
We
30
know a
years
lot more now than we did in the 80s. Yeah, so this movie does not, there's actually a scene where Murtal takes him into a abandoned restaurant and gives him a gun and tells him to kill himself, which
Yes.
is do
If you
not.
it, just
No.
do it. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that scene. And you're
Yeah,
absolutely right.
it's an awful scene.
That's
Needs
not,
to be said. I'd actually probably move this into the personality columns, because I put that in the, I don't know. What do you think?
So the thing I think about personality is I find personality to be very like adjective driven.
Yeah.
So loyal.
Yeah.
Both Murtaugh and Riggs, loyalty is a huge personality trait for them.
Yeah.
The bravado that they both have, I would put that in as a personality trait. Whereas that suicidal ideation that you're talking about is a temporary thing versus a long lasting thing. So when I'm thinking about personality, I'm typically thinking about something that's never going to change throughout your character arc.
Yeah, and that's important to note, that like what we're talking about when we say personality notes, these are things that like stay across when we get to talking about like how the character modulates as circumstances around the character change, how the voice modulates as circumstances around the character change. These personalities are like, those don't change.
Right.
There's always a bravado. It may mute itself,
Mm-hmm.
but it always has to be there, because this is like
Right.
the core of who the person is.
Right.
Right. Like, so if you put shy, which we're not going to do for either Murtaugh or Riggs, but if you put shy in the personality trait, you can't, in like when you're talking about how the character modulates, suddenly modulate to extrovert. Right. Like, that's not how this works. Like, this is the core of who the character is. Sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And something like loyalty, you can have a scene where loyalty gets tested, and we're trying to make a decision about who am I loyal to? Am I loyal to my country, or am I loyal to my spouse? Like, these things can come into question, but the core of who the character is always going to be the same, unless there's a huge culminating event that is going to make or break one of these things. But this is just like who they are at their core.
Yeah.
But then when we start talking about character voice, I like to think about character voice in two different ways. So the first way is what most people think about, and that's like, what are they going to say? What are the words that they're going to use? But the other part of that is how they're going to say it. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about somebody who has a bravado about them, that can come into play with very strong language, very definitive language. Or it can come into play where I'm going to speak very softly, because that's going to make the people around me listen. So that how they're going to express themselves is often just as important, sometimes I would argue more important, but that's up to you, than the words that they're saying. But those are the two things that we need to talk about. And notice how those are very, very different than your character details and your personality notes.
Yeah.
Because you can have an old retired cop who's loyal and exasperated, who speaks very softly and lets other people around him talk and he listens more. Or you can have Murtaugh, who's very direct, doesn't have time for anybody's bullshit, is somewhat aggressive at times, and short-fused is another good one. The other thing about Murtaugh is he does not use an excess of words.
Yeah.
He is never going to give a monologue. He doesn't need to, because he relies on his experience to give him what he needs. So once we've made that determination on his voice, that the part of voice there is like how he's going to talk, the words he's going to choose. He's going to choose very few words. We need to think about that when we're writing, and obviously we're not writing him, but when we watch the movie, we can look, and if we count the number of words that he has, it's really not a whole lot.
Yeah. And I would say, so just putting this picture together, right? Like the goal here is to inform the next set of the chart.
Yes.
So when you write your scene, you're going to be focused on the emotional state of the character and the adjectives we're going to put over there, which we're going to get in a second. So this is really just about building up to that next section and about keeping track of things over long term, right? Because like, for example, this is super helpful in spelling characters' names because I'm always forgetting how to spell my freaking characters' names.
Or
if you ask me,
just changing them.
Yeah, or sometimes just changing them altogether. If you ask me right now, if the current series I'm writing, if Stacy is spelled with an I or an IE or a Y, and you put a knife to my arm and said, I'm going to stab you if you don't get it right, I'd say just stab me. Just go ahead and stab me. I have no idea whether it's an IE or a Y. No clue.
To be fair, that's my fault. Because we were sitting in Sarah one day and we were talking about Stacy's backstory. And I said, why do you have her name spelled this way? Because you had it spelled initially Stacey.
I did.
And I was like, why is it spelled this way? And you said, because she's a pretentious child star.
Yeah,
and I said,
well,
no.
and I think I said because I don't know how to spell Stacy.
Oh, well, it out there. And I said, well, if she was a child star, she has to spell it with an IE so she can write a little heart over it when she signs her name.
Yeah, and that was 100% true. Yeah, and so, yeah, anyway. Yeah, but that's what this is helpful for, right? Like number of kids Murtaugh has. This is great for that. But this is all about informing the next stage.
Okay,
also, oh yeah, go for it, Sully.
Let me just interject here. So that's actually a huge help. So if I was going to go back and rewrite like a cheat sheet for this character worksheet, under each of these columns, I would actually put down what we just talked about, all the descriptives that tell you what to put in that column.
Mm-hmm.
So like in the character voice, instead of seeing what somebody else put in there, it's more useful to say, well, this is how you describe how the character says things.
Mm-hmm.
And the other two, same thing, using adjectives. Because I had to really, when I looked at that example sheet, I had to really kind of just stare and think about it, what each column was actually saying. And I'm slow, I have a thick skull, so it took me a while to figure that out. But I think I might go back and make my own cheat sheet with these descriptions for each of those headers in there. And that make the process go a little bit quicker.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I'm actually going to steal that and just do it on these sheets that I give out from now on.
So on notes under character voice, Jeff, in addition to adjectives that give the character's expression, like how they talk and how they present that information.
Yeah, that's good.
Might be a little easier for someone who isn't listening to us right now.
Yeah.
because sometimes we get into a place where we're only thinking about the words.
Yeah.
And if you've ever taken an acting class, which I did not do very well because I'm terribly shy, but took one in college anyway. You play this game where you take one expression and you put 15 different emotions behind it. Some people also use it with swear words.
Nice.
See how many different ways you can say the same swear word. Play that one with your teenager.
Yeah, I might. Yeah, I was about to say my teenagers might win that game, but not with me in the room.
But you can actually, like, you can make anything sound like anything based off of the tone that you're projecting it. So you really kind of have to think about both of those pieces when you're doing your character voice.
Yeah, and so let's take a second and just go through our two examples here. Because I want to go through Murtal first, and I want to point something out that you had said, Lori, that I really want to emphasize. And then I want to talk about Riggs, and then I want to talk about how we're already lining these two up as partners. Because another part of this is so the point of one of the many ways this tool is helpful is it gives your characters different voices from the start, right? Like from the very beginning, we can start intentionally differentiating their voices, and at the same time making sure that like partners line up a little bit. And these are two great partners to do that, because they really do line up in a lot of ways, and they really are shockingly different. But let's just go through Murtal. So character name is Roger Murtal. Right now in character details, we have father of 2 kids, wants to retire, and is an old cop. We could fill this full of like his address and all the details you wanted to remember, you could put in there. General personality notes, we have loyal, bravado, and exasperated. Now, I'm going to pause here and say that also describes the character Mike from Breaking Bad, right? Mike is an old cop. He wants to retire. Father of 2 kids. I'd probably write in there one of them dead. And he is loyal, extremely loyal. Now, he doesn't have the same kind of bravado. I might say swagger, but you could get away with saying bravado there. And he's exasperated by everything, right? Like the great quote I always tease my kids with is, "Come on, Walter." Right? It's so great. He's got that like Eeyore voice going on. But when we get to notes on character voice, like Laura pointed out, this expression of the voice is so important, right? Because if I were going to put Mike in this chart, I wouldn't say aggressive, direct, short fused. I would say Eeyore-ish, right? Like, because everything goes down at the end of his tone. I would say, and I actually wouldn't say Eeyore-ish. I would say discouraging. Mike is always discouraging people.
Mm-hmm.
I might say dissuading, right? I'd keep the few words.
Yeah.
But I'd also put in there patient.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like his voice expression is super patient.
I might put patient in personality notes.
Maybe, yeah.
Because it's more who he is.
That's true.
Whereas the words that he uses, I would use educating or teaching.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good way to put that.
And then I would also add for Mike that he's slow.
Yeah.
Both in his delivery and in his thoughtful.
Yeah. So all that to say, like, this is where that like expression really comes out, right? Like you can see that the expression starts to bring out how that personality is applied.
Right.
Right.
Now, if we want to take this same character and go a different direction with it, if you take the Murtaugh from the TV show played by Damon Wayans, the character voice would be much more humorous, much more talkative, much more like self-aggrandizing.
Yeah, we'd have to take away the aggressive and the direct, right? Like the short fuse could stay.
Absolutely.
But that character is not aggressive in the same way that the original Murtal is aggressive.
No.
Yeah, and he's definitely self-aggrandizing and definitely verbose. He talks a lot.
Yes.
So yeah.
Okay, so let me ask a clarifying question here. under notes and character voice, when you initially kind of film this out, are you to assume that that's kind of their default sort of response?
Ooh,
That's a
you're
great question.
jumping ahead.
Jumping
And
ahead, okay.
yes, because
Yeah.
these are the things that are never going. They're always going to be the touchstone.
Yeah.
So somebody who uses few words in a place where they're going to talk a lot, it's still going to be a lot compared to their few words. So a lot for them might be 3 sentences, where a lot for a different character might be 3 pages, right?
Yeah.
So like really thinking through what's going to be the cornerstone of who this person is, because people change, but they don't become somebody brand new. Unless, of
Right.
course, you're writing a character with dissociative
I mean,
identity disorder or multiple personalities,
yeah,
in which case you would actually do one of these for each of them. But
yeah.
we're not talking about that right now.
And they will change slowly over time, right? Like we mentioned, like Martin Riggs, we had to debate at the beginning whether we're doing episode, movie 1 or movie 4.
Yeah.
Right, because that thing in his character details, experiencing suicidal ideations, that goes away,
Right.
and that has a big impact on his character voice and how his
Right.
character voice changes.
But his general personality notes never go
Those
away.
never go away.
He never, like, his loyalty never fades, his bravado never fades, and even his recklessness never fades.
Goes away. Yeah.
But the way he talks to other characters changes because he is no longer in crisis on his own. So like in this notes, he's in crisis. So everything that he does is revolving around the fact that he is just like spiraling. But once he gets to that place where he's back on an even keel, and you can see it at the end of the movie when he goes to Murtal's house and he knocks on the door and he hands the bullet to his daughter.
Yeah.
That is like, that scene is perfect for his voice, because that's that shortness of words, like the and I wouldn't use few words for him because we use that for Murtal. Martin is different. He uses an economy or an efficiency of words.
Yeah, I was thinking the word efficient here works good for him.
Yeah.
I also added the word for him here, playful.
Yes.
Because there's always a sometimes unsettling playfulness to him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I love that paired with wild.
Yeah. Yeah, I should probably put them together.
And I might change aggressive for him to intense.
Oh, that's good. Because he is, sometimes there's a silence to his intensity that's very scary, where like there's not the same kind of silence to Murtaugh. So it's good to contrast those words. So, if you're listening along and watching along, part of what you hear us doing here is comparing and contrasting the characters to one another in order to build the full palette, right? Like we would be doing that even if these characters hadn't been written yet, right? Like it's that intentional comparison and contrast. So to make a good team, there needs to be places where they align, right? Like even the odd couple, they have places where they align. They're both lonely, right? Like, so the places that they align give them common goals and allows the team to function. But then to have an entertaining team, you need to have places of conflict, right? So you can see that like already in the personality notes, we have the exasperation of Murtaugh conflicting with the recklessness of Riggs.
And the playfulness.
And the playfulness, and the wild playfulness of Riggs contrasting with the few words and the directness of Murtaugh. And it gives these great scenes where these characters are going to, that's why they got, 4 movies, right? Because we couldn't get enough of this partnership.
Right.
We love the interplay between the 2 characters.
It's why the scene in the abandoned restaurant with the pressuring Riggs to, if you're going to do it, do it. It's
You're gonna
why
do
it
that,
works.
yeah.
From a suicide prevention standpoint,
It's terrible.
that's like the worst thing you can
Never
ever
do that.
But
Never.
from like a movie entertainment, like I'm on the edge of my seat
Yeah.
because there's that moment where you think he's actually going to do it.
He does. He actually pulls the trigger, but Murtaugh magically sticks his finger in the trigger before he can pull it, which is again, this is why you should never do that, because you don't have magical gun skills where you can stick your finger in a trigger before somebody
I
pulls
had
it.
forgotten that. I thought he got right to the edge and he didn't.
No, he doesn't.
What he always does, what he did in his trailer.
Yeah. No, he does it in the restaurant because Murtaugh's pushing him to do it. And Murtaugh's in that scene, Murtaugh's pushing him to do it because Murtaugh thinks he's faking in order to get a crazy discharge.
Right.
So he's trying to prove that he's faking.
You're right. I'd forgotten.
Murtaugh has this kind of come to Jesus moment where he's like, "Oh no, my partner's actually suicidal." So.
Right, because that was right after the building jump, right?
Right after the building jump, he goes to talk a guy down, and instead of talking him off the top of a building, he just grabs him and jumps. So there's a which again goes to that like recklessness and that short fuse and that intensity, that like and playfulness. He's teasing the guy on the roof. He's egging him on, and then he just grabs him and jumps off. So like you can kind of see his voice and all of that. But yeah, anyway, last time we'll make that disclaimer. Don't ever take someone who's having suicidal ideations and do that.
And while we're talking about it, if you or someone you know is having thoughts of suicidal ideation, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline.
Yep.
There are people there who are trained to help. Suicidal ideation is a thing, and it's scary, and we shouldn't be silent about it. So call, get help. Talk to your doctor, talk to somebody. Just, you don't have to suffer by yourself.
Yeah, 100%.
There's my plug for the lifeline. And
1-800-273-8255 if you're in the United States. They're great people. So, and they will help. All right, that got deep. Let's go back to talking about voice. No, it's my fault.
No, it's good. We needed to talk about it.
Okay.
So, Sully, before we move on to something else, do you have questions? Are there other things that you, as somebody who's kind of using this tool newly, thinking about that maybe we should know or think about? Or
one of the questions I had, because I made a list of the worksheet I started today. I filled out all my characters in the current work in progress, but I only filled out one row for the main character. But I was thinking, in light of this compare and contrast thing, that it might be important, and maybe just for me, but for whoever, to put your two main characters, two main protagonists, or maybe your protag and antag, like literally line 1 and line 2, so you can actually see the contrast and comparisons, across the spreadsheet. Now, I'm not sure if that's a thing, or that's something that I would consider doing.
I actually do it. I like using a spreadsheet to build this originally, because I will cut and paste rows all the time and put characters next to each other. So like, let's say we had filled out character 4 down here. I might cut character 2 and just paste character 2 down here. So now I can see these two next to each other, and then I'll cut character 2 and put him back up on line 3. But that
occurred to me too.
Yeah, I move them around all the time to look at them and see how they compare and contrast and see how they move.
That's the one thing I like about Google Sheets, is you don't have to cut and paste like you do in Excel. You can literally
just drag. You just drag them around.
Is like the only thing I like better about
it. If you're old like me, you can't learn something new. You have to go back to what you know.
It took me a long time, Sully.
That's why I actually copied the Google Sheet and put it on my own Excel sheet on my desktop.
Yep. Hey, do what you know.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in that.
Well, and this is, again, like, we've said this in the course we're giving right now, but this is all about making it easier for you. So if it's too hard, like if learning Google Sheets is too hard, don't do it. If you're working in Scrivener, use cards for this, right? Like, don't just put a sheet in. I'm using a Google Sheet and an Excel sheet because these tools are easy for me to use and I know how to do it.
Yeah,
And to be honest, before I started doing this online with people, I was using my journal. And I just draw lines across my journal and do this all in my journal.
yeah, and the same thing would work really well in Plotter as well.
Yeah, Plotter would be great for this.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's move to the emotional states. What do you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think good. So as we talk about emotional states, I think it might be helpful to talk about them kind of the same way we talked about the three main categories of details, personality notes, and character voice.
Yeah.
Your emotional states should line up with your plot points. So
Excellent point. Yes.
if you have your main characters in a fight scene, which we know Riggs and Murtal are in like 5 of them,
Yeah.
you need to make sure that you have an emotional line or emotional column for a fight scene.
Yep.
When they are having a moment where it's just the two of them speaking vulnerably to each other, you need to have that as a column.
And you'll notice I'm putting these on opposites. So if you're watching this, we have the bass voice in the middle, which we'll talk about in a minute and what that is. And then you'll notice I put fight scene to the left and friendship to the right, because as those voices modulate, the anxiety is different in those moments. So they're modulating away from each other. So I'm just going to go ahead and help myself spatially right now by pushing them away from each other visually on the sheet.
Right.
Very clever.
Now, this is where Jeff and I differ when we're thinking about, because Jeff and I are good here because we're like Briggs and Murtaugh. Jeff is very like calm and organized, and I'm just like chaos all the time. I don't like the structure of a spreadsheet in doing something like this. I'm typically going to use a whiteboard or a piece of paper because the columns make me feel trapped. Yeah. Whereas I want to see friendship and intimacy next to fight scene because I might have one flow right from one to the other. So yeah. I want to be able to see them go one to the other. But to Jeff's point, they are modulating in a positive or a negative direction. Yeah. But it is possible to have intimacy within that friendship that comes to a breaking point. Not to go back to it, but going back to it, the scene in the restaurant.
Yeah.
Like that is an intimate moment in their friendship that's modulating negatively.
Yeah.
So you have to be able, so for me, seeing it in the circle element of the wheel is easier for me from a visual standpoint. Yeah. But again, the whole point of this is for you to find the tools that work best for you, and the organization in the spreadsheet, if that works for you, do it.
And I got to say, if there were a whiteboard tool online that like, A, I didn't have to pay for because I'm super cheap all the time. And B, I felt like actually worked like a whiteboard in real life, I would totally be using that and not a spreadsheet like this. Yeah.
I'm going to buy you a smart board that
nice.
You write on, and then it just
then it appears.
Saves it for you.
This is more of a character wheel that like Laura's talking about, where we're like writing this stuff around the characters, right? Like this is for the course Sully is in that Laura and I are working on right now. But this is kind of what Laura would, those columns she's talking about, like putting in different places around the characters so that you can actually see the spatial awareness of them, and sometimes even like, have them branch off further to the side. So I just have a basic wheel there, but you can have like a wheel with like pieces sticking out if you need to. Yeah.
Yeah, I copied that too, and I'll be filling that in as after I do the worksheet.
Nice. Okay,
I'm
so
glad these tools are working for you.
yeah, it's really exciting.
Well, they're just very useful ways to organize information.
Yeah, and that's all. We're just organizing so that it's easy to use when you write. That's the
Right.
goal.
Yeah.
So that it's easy to use when you write.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, not being a writer, but being an editor. I'm reading stories that are created by someone else. So when I'm reading, I'm looking to see these things and I'm looking for the consistency in these things. So I'm lucky. I don't actually have to plan them, but somewhat I can definitely tell the difference when I'm reading when something has been planned versus a character that just shows up as a one-off that the writer thinks that, oh, I'm not going to use this character again because their voice is not as consistent.
Yeah.
And incidentally, it typically makes the main character's voice change as well, and not always in a good way.
Nope.
So having this planned and really understanding, and when you're talking about your main characters, having a baseline or a surprise column will really help with that. So if you do have to write a one-off character, you can kind of write them wherever, but your main character still stays consistent.
Yeah.
Because it's those inconsistencies that make a reader go, I don't really like this character very much, because we don't know who they are. They're this way in this place, and then they're this way in this place. So
yeah, and that's something I realized when I was filling out the role this morning. It once you do all that, you go through all your characters and fill out the appropriate columns. You know the character is a lot better than if you didn't do any of that.
exactly.
So and that will carry through throughout the story if you know them that well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and the truth is, you're gonna do this when you write, regardless.
Mm-hmm.
You can either take, an hour and do it before you start writing, so that you're lining characters up and all the voices are different, and you are feeling the differences between them and being intentional about those differences. Or you can go ahead and write your first draft and then realize that all of your characters sound the same and go back and edit every single voice, right? Like, it's your call. Like, you can do it either way. I know writers who really like to discover voices as they write, and I think that's great. I do that too. I use this as a living document. So, like, I start it before I write, and then I will constantly change it as I write. Not so much my protagonists, but as I write characters for the first time, they rarely fit my plan. So usually I'll write a character in a scene, and then I have to come back and edit my plan for that character, because it doesn't really, they don't necessarily line up to my intention once I start getting the voice in. So I do discovery write characters, but it is, I also track it and am strategic about it. So I'm not writing the same character over and over again and then having to go back and fix that voice in my editing. Yeah. Saves time on the back end.
Well, and I think you could use that method if you're doing dialogue only the first time through as well.
Yeah, dialogue only really helps. This helps with a dialogue only chapter. That's what I was going to say, because you can think through what your characters sound like before you start writing that dialogue. Yeah, that's another conversation for another time. Dialogue only chapters.
And I would recommend that if anyone hasn't done this before and they're at the beginning stages of writing and they don't really know like who their characters are going to be, they have a plot line, but they don't really know who the character is yet. Rather than starting this with somebody that you don't know and feel like trapped because you don't know what to put in the sections, try it with somebody you already know. Do what we're doing here today with a movie that you really know.
Yep.
Or do it with the people in your life, right? Like, I find myself putting my husband in boxes all the time. I'm like, so when I act like this is how you always respond. He hates it, by the way. So if you're going to do it for yourself,
don't do it with your real partner. Yeah. I will say rom-coms are great for this.
Yes.
because there's always two characters. There's always a partnership where you've got two characters who are similar and different. So doing like a You've Got Mail or When Harry Met Sally or
Hallmark has 106 rom-com Christmas movies running between now and
you can
Christmas.
just,
You have
yeah,
106 chances to do it.
I'm going to make no comments about the quality of the writing. I'm just going to say,
Some of them are very good. Some of
do
them are
what you
very
love. Do what you love. Put something in that you love. Celebrate it. All right. So let's keep moving. Do we want to do more than 3 scenes, or is three moments enough?
I feel like people don't want to watch us for 10 hours. So,
Okay.
I mean,
we'll
I would talk about it for 10 hours because it is Lethal Weapon.
Yep.
I think 3 is a good place to start.
Okay, we'll do 3. You can fill, and so just a note, like as you're thinking through your plot and all the places you're going to put these characters, you can put as many on here as you want. You can have 50 on here if you want. If you're doing a whiteboard, you can just keep making that wheel bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Like you can put as much on there as you want. I will say you're going to run out of adjectives. So I don't think I've ever gone beyond 5. I usually find that like after I get to like the baseline and then 4 kind of around that, every situation they're in is going to be some version of those 5 emotional states. But yeah.
And when you start adding more columns, you're not actually adding more value to your planning.
Mm-mm.
Actually start splintering who your character's core is.
Yeah.
Because we all, like Jeff said, we all have a tendency to go back to something that feels comfortable to us. Mm-hmm. So that's where going back to the core makes sense. If you end up in a situation where it feels different than what you thought you were going to write, you can adjust on the fly or add another one there. But in the planning stages, I mean, 5 is really plenty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree, because you're not writing the entire life of the character. It's a moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, it's a really good
so
point.
You need to capture all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to have a character, if the character is not going to be in that scene, like if you're never going to have a character in a fight scene, don't write a fight scene voice for that character. Why would you do that? Right? Like that's just a waste of time.
So Murtaugh's wife is never in a fight scene.
Never in a fight scene.
There's never violence surrounding her. But now his daughter, you need to have her in that moment where there's violence surrounding her because she's kidnapped.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. Sorry, anybody who hasn't seen the movie.
Please, it's from the 80s. Too late. Too late.
Oh, I'm going to go back and rewatch it tonight.
Nice. All right. Let's talk about, let's move into taking just scrolling back over a little bit. I'm going to get rid of these 2 columns so we can see things together because we're not using them right now. So let's go back to talking about notes on the character's voice, which is where we left off, translating into this sheet. So like we said, that middle section of your wheel, we want to kind of call the baseline voice, which is so when we say baseline, what we mean is like this is the voice we're building off of. This is the voice you're going to see your character in the most. It's now, if you see a character in a state of panic most of the time, then that's your baseline. Right? So like if we're doing Joe Pesci's character, Leo Getz, okay. His baseline voice is wheeling and dealing. He's always wheeling and dealing. That's where he starts from. So when I'm describing his baseline voice, I'm describing his baseline voice from like wheeling and dealing, because that's who but Murtaugh is never wheeling and dealing. So his baseline voice does not come from there. Right? Like it comes from where we most often see him, and we're going to build off of our character, the notes on character voice to get that baseline. Right? So I'm just going to put in there right away that he's aggressive. He's using few words. And he has a short fuse. Right? And now I'm going to start to add in here phrases that he says all the time that I want to use. You going to say something more?
Yeah, before you do that, I don't want to get too far away from what you just said
Okay.
about Leo Getz.
Yep.
The wheeling and dealing, just to be clear, wheeling and dealing is not a voice of the character. It is a personality trait.
Yeah. It's
So
his like emotional state.
Right.
Yeah.
His personality is that he's wheeling and dealing and he's manipulating and he's always trying to find the win. His voice is agitated and his
Yeah.
voice is like the words that he uses are going to get him the win. So he's choosing his words really carefully
Yeah.
because he wants to manipulate you. That's different than his personality, which is wheeling and dealing and always wanting to win. So it's really weird to like split the baby to figure out which piece goes in which. I think I'm mixing metaphors there, but figure out what goes where. But it's important to like not think about wheeling and dealing as a voice trait
Yeah.
because it's not helping you figure out what he's saying, but it's helping you figure out the motivation for why he's saying it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
And as we move this, like these character voice notes into this, like, okay, this is what we're going to actually use on our wheel. We want to make sure we're using words that are helpful to inform our writing, right? So you'll notice I haven't moved direct over into Murtaugh's voice because I'm pondering, like, is that going to actually help me write his voice? I don't know. It might not. I might put it there, but that's the questions I'm asking, right? Like him having a short fuse, that's going to help me write his voice. I know that when I write words for Murtal, they need to illustrate that he has a short fuse. I know I'm writing few words. I know his words are going to be aggress because I can't spell aggressive.
I beat you. That's the only part I've got.
Yeah, I'm also gonna, do we want to add any more adjectives in here before we start adding actually like phrases he says all the time?
No, I think we can go to phrases.
Okay. So, and again, more is not helpful, right? Like you don't necessarily want to do less. You want to do exactly what you need.
And it's hard to know what that is. So, so I guess 2 O's and 2 on this one.
Oh, thank you.
So thinking about it, like, what are the 3 core things that are going to help me figure out what he's going to say?
Yeah.
And then maybe 1 for how he's going to say it. So what I would say is the how would be exasperated.
Yeah, that's a good word to bring over.
Always, like, it does not matter who he's talking to, whether he's talking to his kids or to his wife or to his boss or to Riggs, he is always exasperated. It's like, oh, every single time. And that's the I'm too old for this shit, right? Like, he does it all the time because that's the core of who he is at the baseline.
Yeah, and you can I've put body languages into these. Like if there's something somebody does all the time that I feel like really represents their voice, I'm going to put that in here. You know, whatever you need to get yourself into the mouth of that character, that's what you're going to use.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about how Murtal modulates. When he moves to a fight scene, what changes? And let me give you a tip. Not you, Laura, because you and Sully know. Let me give a tip to everybody listening or watching. Think of modulation as taking steps up a staircase. Don't skip steps, right? No jumping steps. So if I'm going from aggressive to silent, which I'm not, by the way, but if I'm going from aggressive to silent, I know I've got problems, right? There's steps I've skipped. I'm either moving to an emotional state that's too far away from my baseline and my voice is jumping too much, like it's too emotional, and I need to create some kind of in-between step, or I need to find different words.
Yes. So can I use a different example other than aggressive to silent?
Yeah, I didn't really like that example.
Because you have few words, and few words might actually go to silent.
Few words might go to silent. Yeah.
But
aggressive isn't going to go to silent.
aggressive isn't going to go to screaming.
Hey, there we go. That's
right.
better.
Like
or gleeful.
Aggressive, or what?
Gleeful.
Lethal.
Right. Like aggressive isn't going to go to happy.
Right.
He can't be naturally aggressive and then in a fight scene be happy.
Right.
That doesn't. You've missed
the
something.
Joker did that.
He did. Well, but there's got to be a step between. So you might put on here a baseline fight scene mania. And then under mania, he could be happy, but you got to move him from the baseline to the fight scene to the mania.
So
mania to mania
is an excellent word for Riggs.
Yeah, that's true.
Because Riggs's mania does go to that hysteria in the fight scene.
Yeah. That's very true.
So going from aggressive to, the extreme, you could say he raises his voice or uses shorter terms or maybe cuts off the word, harder than normally, that sort of thing.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. And so the exasperated
yelling.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't think Murtal ever yells.
He doesn't actually, you're right. Yeah. And I was going to say the exasperated actually goes to kind of a frustrated intensity. I'm missing a word.
There's also a sharpness that Murtal has during a fight scene.
Yeah. Describe that sharpness, though, because sharpness can mean multiple things.
So he relies on his skill and experience.
Yeah.
So there's an expert. Let's go with expertise or focus. Good. Focus is another good word. Yeah. So I'm thinking about the scene where they first see his daughter in like the boiler room.
Yeah.
And I love the word focus here because he's got that intensity and aggressiveness from his baseline.
Yeah.
But it gets to this place of, I know how this is going to end, which goes back to his personality of the bravado that he brings to every scene. And that's where we're seeing the focus and the intensity and the shortness and even like the raising of the voice, but it's raising of the voice getting louder, not yelling. It's like he's becoming commanding in that moment.
And I'm realizing I put in eerie calm right there, and I'm doing exactly what I said not to do, which is skipping steps. Right? In moments of extreme anxiety, he gets an eerie calm, which is the next step of that focused expertise. Right. But I was jumping too fast to that. So if I wanted to write a scene where he was going to get an eerie calm, like in the end of the first movie where his daughter's being held at gunpoint and he's trying to like talk the kidnappers down, he has an eerie calm about him. I need to create another column for that scene. Because that scene's more than just their normal fight scenes. That scene's something beyond that. So,
Right. And that's this, the scene on the front lawn where he and they've run over the fire hydrant and the water's going everywhere, and he decides to let Riggs fight the guy in hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah.
And Murtaugh has everything under control. That's that where he's telling the rest of the cops to stand down so they can have this huge fight scene.
Yeah.
Because he's like at the culmination of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so let me just go back to the focus part again. I recently read a book where the author did a really good job of ramping this up through the character's voice and action, but he also pointedly stated that he was focused. So I'm not sure if he needed to point that out to the reader or not, but he did both. Now what do you guys say to that?
So sorry, Jeff, do you want to
go for it? Take it.
Okay. So the thing about movies versus books is in a movie, you have the physical presence of the character to show things that you can't show in a book. So having that declaration from the narrative perspective that the character is focused is absolutely fine, as long as it's consistent within the character. Some authors are going to rely on the character's voice and the character's actions to do that. Other authors are just going to rely on actions, and other authors are going to rely on dialogue. It depends on who your character is, what the scene calls for, and what your preferences are as a writer. Like, Jeff and I aren't doing this podcast, and Jeff isn't doing the series and letting me tag along to tell people how to do it. The goal is to put tools into the writing universe that people can use and rely on to enhance their storytelling.
Yeah.
Because if every author writes in the same manner, then like, why are there so many writers?
Yeah, this isn't a plug and play.
Right. So
like-
in retrospect, that was consistent throughout the book, and I can't wait for the third one to come out. But I think, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, but I think when he stated, was telling us that the character was focused or more focused, I think that actually added to the tension in the scene.
Yeah.
To tell us that, as well as to show it through his dialogue and action.
That's the ultimate goal of having your character modulate their voice and their actions in your scenes, is to communicate that changing intensity, changing tone throughout your work, right? Like, you want to be modulating your character to give the reader a deeper engagement in your character's emotional state, and thus a deeper engagement in your book, and thus like more pages read, right? Because in the end, that's the goal. More, as a writer, the goal is more pages read from the reader. So if we can pull our reader into the emotional state of our characters, we can increase those pages read, and we can do that by modulating the voice based on the scene. That's just a way that all we're doing is communicating the emotional tone of the scene through the character. Now, I will say, going back to the phrase, he was focused, it sounds like the author you were reading was using it really well. The people that I've worked with, and myself included in the people that I've worked with, 9 times out of the 10, if we use the phrase he was blank, we're just being lazy. And we need to figure out a different way. He was anxious. Don't tell me he was anxious. Show me he was anxious in his voice and in his mannerisms and how he's talking and how he's
Right.
he was excited. Don't tell me he was excited. Show me he was excited. Right? Like, so there's that. This is all about building tools for writers to show what they're doing.
And I think you have to be cognizant of the tense you're using too. This author used first person.
Yeah.
So that I don't know, but that to me would probably come across differently in third person.
It definitely comes across differently in third person. But yeah, so I think, again, what you're describing, like pulling the reader into an emotional state by modulating how the character is behaving, sounding, and moving in the space around them, engages the reader. Pulling a character, just telling the reader how the character is feeling, 9 times out of 10 is cheating, and doesn't have the effect you want it to have.
Because most people don't articulate what they're feeling.
Yeah.
They articulate the impact those feelings are having.
Yeah.
So, for example, in first person, I'm never going to say, I'm really focused on what I'm doing right now. I'm going to say, this is really interesting, or, oh, I'm so excited to be part of this discussion. I'm going to lean forward. My speech is going to come a little bit more rapidly, but I'm never going to say I'm focused. Most of the time when we're feeling anxious, we're not saying, this is making me anxious right now. We're like clenching our fists and we're holding our breath and we're like, starting and like I can't get anything out because I'm
stuttering.
being blocked by it.
Yeah,
so
exactly. The only exception is Mr. Data. He would actually tell you what he's feeling.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But one could argue that he's not actually feeling things. He's
Right.
logically computing them.
That's a whole different podcast.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about Murtaugh as a friend, because we want to get that other wheel so we can see a full kind of wheel for him.
Right.
So the fuse expands, right? He's a little more tolerance increases.
Mm-hmm. But he's not patient.
He's not patient.
But his
Still has a
tolerance-
fuse, right?
Yep.
But he tolerates a little bit
You
more.
think that would alter depending on who he's interacting with?
So that's a great point. And yes, but here we're talking about intimacy. We're not talking about just friends. We're not talking about the scenes where he's around other cops. We're talking about when he's one-on-one with Murtaugh, or excuse me, with Riggs after they've developed part of a friendship. We're talking about his relationship with his wife. We're talking about his relationship with his kids. If we know there's going to be a scene with just the other cops in the squad room, that's going to have another column.
Yeah. It's
Or
not going to be as
it's going to
intimate.
look like his baseline.
So
Yeah.
the degree to which he changes depends on the situation.
Mhm.
Exactly. And the way I like to think about this is the way we all put on different suits depending on where we are, right? Like when we're at home and we're wearing our casual clothes with our partners and our spouses, we're open, we're vulnerable. And I would actually add a vulnerability into his friendship intimacy. I wouldn't use the word vulnerable. I would maybe use the word cautious or optimistic there, that he's going to show to his wife. He's going to show to Riggs after they've bonded. He's going to show to his kids, but he's never going to show to anybody else.
Yeah.
And then when we go to work, we put on a professional suit and we change the language that we use. We don't say everything that we're thinking because we know that we have to influence people that we work with, either because we want to get promoted or because we need our subordinates to look at us like our position requires.
Yeah.
When we're a student, we act differently. That's what each one of these columns is a different suit that the same person is wearing, and understanding what's appropriate and inappropriate for that character, for that situation.
And if we're going back to their personality notes, we're expressing and muting aspects of their personality based on the situation they're in.
Right.
So in the intimacy, we're expressing his loyalty and we're muting his bravado.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But in a large group, like fun time scene, we're going to expand his bravado. Right. Like when he's in the police room, he's going to become more machismo, teasy. He's still going to use, and it's going to sound the same. He's still going to have this aggressive humor, right? He's still going to laugh some. His tolerance for antics are still going to increase, but he's not going to try and fail to share his feelings, right? Like he's not going to have that optimistic caution that Laura was describing. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So we can see kind of how he's modulating in these scenes, which gives really nice emotional intensity. So we've already talked about how characters compare and contrast. Do we need to do Riggs? We've been going for an hour. We've been talking for a long time. That's a lot of talking.
So I think what's important about Riggs is his friendship intimacy and how it looks different than his baseline voice.
Yeah, so let's do his baseline real quick. There's I'm going to keep that word efficient word usage, efficient words, which is different than few words, right? Like he's very strategic in what he says. He also likes to play. And this is almost a mask. right? There's this playful mask he's got going on in his language. He's covering some deep pain with humor, right? But there's a mania to him, and I'm thinking about one of the opening scenes of the first movie where he's like buying coke from a bunch of drug dealers, and they tell him it's going to be 100, and he starts counting out $1 bills from his wallet, and they start yelling that they meant 100K, and he's got this like wild look in his eye, like,
Right.
What are you talking about? And so
Right.
he just puts his badge on the table, right? Like there's still a mania, but there's a playful mania that also is kind of a were you going to jump in with something more?
I was going to let you finish because I was going to get to the fact that he does not have a catchphrase.
Yeah.
Because he's a wild card, and that's where the mania comes in. Like there's always a surprise with Riggs.
Yeah.
So like the scene you were talking about, Jeff, with the counting of the $1 bills, right? Like that's the there's also a literal sense to his language. Like there's no hyperbole with him. There's no similes or metaphors. Everything he says is very literal.
Yeah. And I'm going to put that on here. It says exactly what he means, because if I were using this chart to write a character, that actually like means something to me. So just to note that like the words, there is no perfect word to put on here. There is no like perfect description. You're building this for yourself. So words mean what they mean to you, right? This is your chart.
And will mean to you 6 months from now.
And will mean to you 6 months from now.
This is a living document. And
Yeah.
as you're writing, you might finish your book in 4 months. You might finish your editing in 5, but you might go back to write the second book in your series 6 months after that.
Yeah.
Being able to use this without having to really go back and reread your books.
Yeah.
Figure out what you mean.
Okay.
Yeah,
so that brings up another question. If that's your plan to write another book or a series, perhaps, should you go through this after your first one is finished and kind of update the evolution of the character, if need be?
So your starting point for your next book, sorry, Jeff, I could have let you answer this.
No, go for it.
Your starting point for your next book will be kind of your ending point at your first book, but some of the things are not going to change, specifically the personality and mostly your character voice, because while your character may have evolved, you may add something to their personality, but you're not most of the time going to take anything away. Like your storyline, the hero in your story is likely going to increase their bravado or increase their honesty or increase their loyalty. And then they may add a level of judgment.
Yeah, judiciousness. Yeah, if you want to think of this on like a 301 level, we did like some 301 level visual shit. If you can picture your character wheel around. Oh, wait, I have one, so I can just put it here.
Oh, the one that has the colors on the outside?
No, I didn't bring that one.
Okay.
If you can picture your character wheel, it's like you're drawing this on a whiteboard, and I've got my voice modulations. At the end of book 1, my character is likely going to drift closer into one of his other voices, and then for book 2, you're just going to build more modulations around it. So
so if it was
his baseline is actually going to drift into another of his voices. So like if we look at Lethal Weapon, Riggs actually drifts this direction, right? Like he moves as the movies progress, he moves closer into friendship intimacy Riggs, and he starts to lose the mania. Right, like because so friendship intimacy Riggs, we still have an efficiency of words, but he's going to expand on that playfulness, so that he just becomes downright playful in his intimate moments, and he likes to make jokes. Right, he likes to get other people laughing in his intimate moments.
There's also a sincerity.
Yep.
That happens in that intimacy. It's not vulnerable, but it's sincere.
And at the same time, he's still reckless. He doesn't lose the mania. He just mutes it. Right? Like, and that sincerity comes out of that, like saying exactly what he means, and the intensity kind of combines into this sincerity. But as the movies move, we move farther into this this expression of his personality and farther away from the mania. So if you're talking about like writing books in a series, you're going to find at the end of, like, if you're writing character transformation, you're going to find at the end of your book, you're writing more in one of these columns than another. And I usually, as a general sense, say like, okay, if I'm writing a ton at the end of the book in friendship intimacy, then my next book probably needs to move some of those traits into the character's baseline. Yeah.
And they don't always have to progress in a positive way.
No.
It's possible, if you're writing a series, to progress in a negative way.
Probably
And
should at times.
the way that I like to think about that is the Rocky series. At the end of the first Rocky, he ends in a place that's extremely downtrodden.
Mm-hmm.
The second movie picks up at a loss, and he builds back up from there. So we actually saw his voice modulate in a different direction. It still had the same intensity of who his character is, but it's pushed in a direction of failure, and I have to move myself back up from failure. Versus the end of the second one, that ends obviously in a win, and he's on top of the world and that sort of thing. So
you can see it in literature in
also, sorry for the spoiler on the Rocky movies.
Again, you can say I'm about to spoil Tolkien. You can see it in literature in the Tolkien books. Frodo becomes, in the Lord of the Rings series, becomes increasingly discouraged with each book. And until in the end, he actually he achieves his quest and like has this massive, all of the weight is gone from him. But at the beginning of each book, Frodo is more weighed down than he was in the book previously, and he actually stops at the beginning of this. Tolkien did this really interesting thing with Frodo's voice, where at the beginning of the first book, he's closer to Sam than to Gollum. But by the end of the third book, he's closer to Gollum than he is to Sam. Right. And it's a slow transition in his voice.
So if it was me and I have a series planned, I'd probably make little notes to just, say by the end of book one or whatever, this is the new kind of reset, if something has changed that much.
Yeah, and that's a plot journey that Tolkien was taking Frodo on, right? Like he's taking Frodo to the pits of despair and to like his deep inner questioning of his own, I want to say humanity, but he's a hobbit, so hobbithood. He's taking him to like question what it means to be a creature, right? Like he's questioning his own existence and, can he withstand this deep temptation for power? Is the question of Lord of the Rings. Will power ultimately corrupt every being that comes in contact with it? And so it's clearly like Tolkien is expressing in a super masterful way, expressing a plot point through and a theme of the book through the character's voice. Right, like we're feeling the theme of the book by watching Frodo go through this pain. Right, like we're in A Man Called Ove. Right, like his voice moves from being suicidal and thinking about death a lot to not a huge move. He's still a grumpy old dude, but his voice moves into being more protective of his community. Right, like in finding value in his community, and that theme, that value is found in the community around you, is communicated through the transformation of the character's voice over a very long book. Yeah, it was a long explanation to be like, yeah, just in the next book, figure out where your character left off and pick back up there. That's what I could have said. Anyway, that's why these podcasts are an hour. Under Jeff's baseline voice, we put too many words. Anyway,
No worries.
yeah. All right, Sully. Any other questions you got laid out about character voice, using a character wheel?
No, I think I have a much better idea of how to use this tool.
Awesome.
Great.
That was our goal. Laura, as always, you're fantastic. Thank you for jumping into this.
Yeah, good to meet you, Laura.
I know this has been really fun. I love that like you think that this is something that I actually have something to say about.
Whatever. I reject your attempts at humility. So, yeah, no, thanks, guys. I'm going to stop the recording so we can.
Okay.